Hesselgesser on Purpose was brought to you by the Farmhouse Cafe, farm fresh foods you love to eat. If God Could Bake, where they deliver home-baked happiness right to your door. Alston Computer Services, professional computer service at an affordable price.
Living in the millennium, souls be looking for a healing, and he's healing them, filling some of them with his spirit.
Welcome to Hesselgesser on Purpose. Thanks so much for being here this evening. As you can tell, we're not in the studio. We're doing things a little bit differently this evening. We first met Jeff Beaudoin at Dr. Drew Drummond's office. He knows exactly what he does and why he does it. So I begged him to come to his studio and learn more about his business, which is called Omaha Power Yoga. Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you having us into your lovely studio. As I mentioned before, I'm a clean slate. I have no preconceptions about yoga directly. You know, of course, I hear things and I've read things and I've seen pictures, but I have never myself experienced it. But you and I were visiting just a few moments ago, and what has always struck me about yoga is I always thought that yoga has a very deep spiritual connection. And even meeting you at Dr. Drummond's office, that came through. Am I correct in that? Is that a good association?
Yeah, the goal of yoga, if there is a goal, is the present moment and the self as you are, like your authentic self. That is really the goal of yoga. The yoga practice is designed to quiet your mind down, open up your heart, and on a physical level, just take care of the physical body so you can practice what yoga really wants you to do, and that is practice meditation. And formal meditation, the goal of formal meditation, become aware of yourself and become aware of what's going on in your mind and your body, which you are not. You are that which is aware. So the deeper aspects of yoga come from practicing it from the place of seeking yourself, which is it's an ironic paradox, because what you're looking for is that which is looking. You know, you can't get away from yourself, but I think in our culture we spend so much time
doing just that?
Yeah, staying busy, trying to get somewhere, always on our Facebook or on our social media, and or run into the grocery, or trying to get somewhere. You know, they call it a rat race, and I know the only people that win the rat race are rats, and it's like we're all, our entire culture and our entire society is addicted to getting somewhere, to constantly trying to one-up each other and attain more things. And we kind of, through that process of growing up in that culture and that society, you forget about what life is really about. And life is really about, love. And love isn't something in the future, it's not something in the past, it's always right here and right now. And the goal of yoga is, yoga says chitta, vritti, and nirodha. Chitta means mind and everything that makes up the mind, and then vritti is the fluctuations of the mind, which are stimulated according to yoga philosophy by fear, craving, aversion, and ego. And nirodha means stop. So when you come to a yoga class, at least in my class and the class that we have at Omaha Power Yoga, the whole idea behind the practice is to practice techniques, of which are very specific breathing techniques. We focus on physical alignment and the quality with which you do everything. But the biggest point is your presentness and your focus. The whole goal is to quiet your mind down, so that you can have a greater sense and a greater experiential feeling of who and what you are really. So,
are people ever intimidated by the thought about taking yoga because they feel like they need to be at a certain place physically?
Yeah, and it's sad because yoga doesn't say you have to be flexible or strong or balanced or toned or focused,
have to start
or
somewhere, right?
attentive. Yeah, that's the reason on a physical and mental level, that's the reason you practice. You don't start with what you need. It's like, what was the analogy I thought of? I wouldn't go to Spanish class if I already knew.
You can speak Spanish fluently.
Or what was it? It was, I'm not going to avoid going to Spanish class because I don't know Spanish.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not going to say, well, I don't know Spanish, so I'm not going to go to Spanish class.
Yeah.
But that's how people approach yoga. They think that they have to be flexible and they have to have some sort of philosophical understanding, or they think yoga is a religion, or they, like you were talking about, you've heard about certain yoga classes that are very extreme.
Mm-hmm.
So it scares people, which is sad, but...
Well, and I thought I needed to be able to,
Yeah.
I can't do that. But don't you think, it's interesting because I think you touched on something important. I think we have this tendency to not start something because we don't. I had a good friend who had the philosophy of, if he didn't think he was going to be good at it, he wouldn't start it. He wouldn't do it. Well, how do you know? Number one, and you always have to start somewhere. Yoga isn't a competition.
Right.
It's a process.
Right.
Right?
Correct. Exactly. You answered the question. The yama is the first limb in the 8 limbs of yoga. One of them is, the first one is ahimsa, and that means do no harm. Be gentle. And the second one is satya, be truthful and be honest. But the third one addresses what you were just alluding to, and that is asteya. And asteya means non-stealing. And in our culture, we think of non-stealing as like, don't take other people's stuff. Well, yoga means don't try to be like somebody else. Because you're a unique individual. You can never be like anybody else. So it's a complete waste of time, and it's an exercise in futility, trying to be like somebody else.
Yeah.
But that's how people approach yoga. They think that they have to be flexible and they have to have some sort of philosophical understanding, or they think yoga is a religion, or they, like you were talking about, you've heard about certain yoga classes that are very extreme. So it scares people, which is sad, but...
Well, and I thought I needed to be able to,
Yeah.
I can't do that. But don't you think, it's interesting because I think you touched on something important. I think we have this tendency to not start something because we don't. I had a good friend who had the philosophy of, if he didn't think he was going to be good at it, he wouldn't start it. He wouldn't do it. Well, how do you know? Number one, and you always have to start somewhere. Yoga isn't a competition.
Right.
It's a process.
Right.
Right?
Correct. Exactly. You answered the question. The yama is the first limb in the 8 limbs of yoga. One of them is, the first one is ahimsa, and that means do no harm. Be gentle. And the second one is satya, be truthful and be honest. But the third one addresses what you were just alluding to, and that is asteya. And asteya means non-stealing. And in our culture, we think of non-stealing as like, don't take other people's stuff. Well, yoga means don't try to be like somebody else. Because you're a unique individual. You can never be like anybody else. So it's a complete waste of time, and it's an exercise in futility, trying to be like somebody else. And there's another philosophical point that yoga makes, and that's satya, and that is be content. And practice being content. So if you come into yoga with an idea that you need to be the best at it, you're missing the point right off the bat. Because first of all, yoga doesn't care. You could be the greatest yogi in the world physically, and I personally know some people that can do crazy physical stuff, but they're not focused, they're not present, they're not happy with themselves, they're not happy or content, they're not really practicing the deeper stuff of yoga. But we live in a culture that is just fueled and driven by vanity,
right,
and the way things are looked. So it makes sense that that would be very, very prevalent, very common, that people would be under the impression that it has something to do with, oh, I'm more flexible than you, or I can hold a handstand longer than you. But, if that happens, sometimes that happens, and people just practice on a regular and consistent and sincere basis, and ultimately they end up being physically very strong or flexible. But if they're really practicing yoga, and if they're really approaching it with a meditative, focused mindset, they don't care.
So how long has yoga been around? And Where did it originate?
That is a question that's up for debate. Yoga itself, the history of yoga itself goes back over 6,000 years to, from what I heard and what I've read, is originally in Afghanistan. A lot of people think it's India, but the area currently known as Afghanistan. But approximately 260 to 500 BC, this guru sage named Maharishi Patanjali wrote or distilled what's called the Yoga Sutras. And he distilled the basic philosophy of yoga, and that's the 8 limbs of yoga. So yoga has been around for 5,000 years. It was really organized a little bit over 2,000 years ago by Patanjali, who's considered the father, grandfather, great-grandfather of yoga. And then it continues to evolve. It continues to evolve, and yoga's evolved tremendously in the last 100 years. But that's the gist of the history of yoga. And some people think that yoga's trendy and yoga's faddish, but I mean, I don't think 5,000 years is a trend or a fad. But
Seems like it's got a little bit of longevity to me. Yeah. So how long has Omaha Power Yoga been in existence?
I opened Omaha Power Yoga 5 years ago this January.
Why?
I started practicing yoga 15 years ago, and I was big into weights, like you are now. And I was going to the gym 6 days a week for over 20 years. And I was dealing with depression, a lot of sadness, and some of my own stuff, anger. And I found yoga in the first yoga class I went to. I had a very deep experience, and I thought, there's something here for me. And sure enough, there was. So I started practicing yoga more than lifting weights, and eventually I cut out the weights and cut out the gym, and I cultivated my own yoga practice to where that's all I do now. So yoga took me from a place of, I would say, vanity and depression and even suicide with some of the stuff I've been through, and it brought me into I guess the light in a sense. And what I wanted to do, and what I still want to do, is share it with other people, because I always say yoga saved my life. I'd be either in prison or dead if it wasn't for yoga practice. So I opened the studio in Omaha because I felt that Omaha, of all the places I've lived and traveled, which there's many, the need is greatest here.
Why do you say that?
That's a leading question. Yoga, I mean, in Omaha, Nebraska, it's a sedentary town.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll just call a spade a spade. It is what it is. For example, in the last month, 2 of the healthiest restaurants in town are closed. And I lived in places like Phoenix and Chicago and Portland and Greece and Florida and all these places where just people exercised more. So I thought that Omaha would benefit from what I teach more than anywhere else. That's why I opened in Omaha.
I think there are so many misconceptions with yoga, and that you can't really get in shape with that, that it's not going to be that beneficial. And that's not true.
Well, and it might be at some yoga studios, and there's just as many types and styles and approaches to yoga as there are yoga teachers and in fact yoga practitioners. So I don't know what goes on in some yoga studios, and I don't know how people get their ideas about what it is and what it isn't. I do hear from people that come to my class that there's places that don't talk about philosophy, and they don't teach the breath, and they don't talk about the 8 limbs, the yamas, the niyamas, pratyahara, asana, pranayama, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, which are all aspects of yoga practice, which we teach here. And so I don't know what goes on. I do know that what we try to do here, and I teach the teachers that I've trained to stay true to the practice and try to stay true to the ancient wisdom and the ancient philosophy and the qualities that yoga ask, and always remember what the goal of yoga is. So if you see, we don't have mirrors in the studio. We don't play a lot of music. I don't play any music in my classes. There's no clock on the wall. There's one clock right there. It says now. So we try to eliminate all distractions. People aren't allowed to bring their cell phone into class. So we've created a room. I've tried to create a room in a space where people can come together and practice being present. I'll tell you what, the battle, fighting against the culture is 1,000 times harder than I thought it would be.
Really?
Because you were talking about why is it like here in Omaha that people in general are sedentary, and that there's way more fast food restaurants and unhealthy choices than there are healthy restaurants. I can't name more than 2 healthy restaurants off the top of my head, and they're not even really restaurants. They're just places you can go have a salad or something healthy. But when I was in Chicago and Austin and Portland, I mean, it's in California, there's healthy choices everywhere.
Sure.
It's stark, and the reason that healthy restaurants don't make it and unhealthy restaurants do is because the law of economics. People are buying the unhealthy stuff. That goes down to the culture, and what makes the culture is individuals deciding on how it's going to be. And you get a massive individuals that decide on how it's going to be, and that's how it is. So fighting against that is hard.
So I have a question. As a person who's never taken a yoga class ever, walk me through, can a person, if a person comes to your studio for the first time, what's that experience going to look like? And the reason I ask is because I got a wild hair a couple years ago. Yes, in January, like everybody does, to take a Zumba class. And I felt like I was kind of experiencing what you were. I felt like I needed to get out. I was a little sad. I felt like I needed something a little bit more structured, to get me going. So I thought, okay, Zumba. I like to move. I like the music. I thought maybe I would meet some new friends. And the first couple times I went, holy shit. I just said shit. Sorry. I felt lost. The routines, I was midway. I didn't know where to put my hands and my arms, and there was mirrors, and I was intimidated because everybody else seemed to know what they were doing. And I maybe through my own fault, I didn't feel welcome. I didn't feel accepted. So I stayed with it for probably 3 or 4 times, and then I did what most of us do, and I stopped. I quit. So I'm curious, what that might feel like to a new person coming into the studio for the very first time.
That's a fantastic question, because it's probably the most frustrating thing for us as a staff here at Omaha Power Yoga, because we have 3 what are called basic power classes a week. And they're classes designed for people who are either new to the studio, they might have practiced yoga at other places, they might have been practicing yoga for 10 years or never practiced yoga before. But that class is designed to teach you about the philosophy, a lot of things I've already talked about, and give you some alignment cues and some instruction on physical alignment, the breathing instruction, to give you a really good idea of what we're doing and kind of get your sea legs in a sense. But the reality is that the people that really need to be going to that class aren't going to that class. Because the human ego goes, well, I don't need beginners, so they'll go into I have a woman that's never been in the studio before, signed up tonight for my most advanced class, my most advanced art class. And this has happened many, many times before, and I know I'm jumping ahead, but I'm relating my experience. They come in and they're like, well, it's yoga. How hard can it be? So it's like these extremes where some people are super intimidated by it and they're frozen with fear, and other people are like, okay. The reality is that I've heard this many times, that yoga meets you where you're at. I don't believe that. I believe that meeting yourself where you're at is yoga. And that goes back to the second principle of the yamas I talked about, satya, and that comes down to being truthful and honest with yourself. And you got to look yourself in the mirror. Where am I at? You start a beginner's class. Get out of your ego and get out of the vanity and get into a little humility and back off and learn a little bit. So we offer those classes. But they're the least attended classes we have. We have 140 classes a month. And people fail all the time because they skip ahead. They try to come into a regular power class or something, and they're overwhelmed.
I just, at the end of the day, I don't feel like that was particularly for me. And I think it's important for people to find, you know, what works for them.
And it might not have been for you.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it wasn't.
Yeah.
So, you know, and that's, you chalk it up, say it just isn't for me.
Yeah.
You know, and my first teacher, one of the most brilliant things he ever said was very simply, he said, if you like it and it helps you, it's good. Doesn't matter what it is. And I've really thought about that over the years. I mean, that's a pretty broad statement, but I truly believe that if you like it and it helps you, then it's good. And you know, some people like walking, some people like running, some people, I mean, there was 20 years where all I liked to do was lift weights. And weights is the thing. And I was very, very passionate about weights, and now I won't touch a weight. So, you know, that's where I was at. But people are creatures of habit. So if you want to change a habit, if you want to change, you got to find something and stick with it for a good, you know, a good while, especially as we get older, right? Because the neuroplasticity, our brains are wired a certain way. I was joking around with my girlfriend the other night that I've been opening the door for her to get in and out of the car for about a month now, and it occurred to me, now it's a habit. I said, you're hooked up now, because I force myself and I remind myself to do it for a month, and now it's a habit, and now I just automatically do it. So it's with anything. But you talked about January, February comes along, people come in, they're a one and done crowd. We joke about it.
Yeah.
And don't be one of the one and doners.
Yeah.
You got to stick with it.
Yeah.
You know, we offer great packages and great specials here for new people. We give 20 classes for $20.
Really?
It doesn't get cheaper than that, but we give you 6 weeks to do it. We say you got to come on a regular basis, and once you get over that hump of your own resistance and your own blocking, once you change your habit, you're good to go.
So I'm not quite sure how to ask this, but I just, you know, for people that are listening or watching on YouTube or through our website or on television, for people like me who haven't been to a class, who is yoga good for?
Yoga's good for everybody. I've never met a person, I don't care what your age is or what your situation, it's good for you. Because if you can allow yourself to come in and do what you can, and we give a lot of instruction on how to recognize if you're going too far. And we also ask people to pay attention to what they're doing, not what your neighbor's doing. We give you a lot of freedom, a lot of opportunity to stay in your world and just take care of yourself. So it's everybody's going to benefit physically, mentally, emotionally from yoga practice. Yeah, we're Omaha Power Yoga, so there's probably there's definitely a population of people out there that might be wheelchair bound. You know, that there's not a class for them. You know, and if there was enough population that was interested in that type of stuff, I would definitely offer it to them. But everybody benefits from breathing deep, and everybody benefits from moving consciously and gently and moderately and consistently.
What do I need to come to a class?
A good attitude, an open mind, yoga mat, although we rent mats and sell mats too, and you know, you got to get out of your own way and do it.
You know, I love the thing that you said earlier. Years ago, I owned a salon and day spa, and I had the same philosophy. There were no windows. I had no clocks. Everything was carpeted. Cell phones were not allowed, because I wanted a place for people to come and just be, and not worry about what's going, you know, the weather or you know, time or anything like that. And I think, you know, and when I walked in here, it feels good. You know, it has a really beneficial aura to it. So
it took it. You know, we've been at this location for a year and 3 months, and it took a good year for it to get to that point. Because a room carries the space, and a space carries the energy of the people that most frequent that room. And our old location, it took about a year there too. And you get to the point, I remember being in this room, and it was probably the 1,000th class we had in this room, and I go, okay, it happened. It happened. You know, and you had quoted unknowingly Gandhi, that be the change you want to see in the world. Well, that's really, if we want to talk about change in culture and changing the world and making the world a better place, you got to work on yourself, and you got to bring that. You can't be a follower; you got to be a leader. Well, you gotta pay attention to what you're feeling and listen to what your body needs and take care of yourself.
I agree with that, but I think we also need to be not so much in competition with everybody else and try to one-up, every single person. You know, I often say in the show and in my own life that, especially when I talk to women, it seems like we think of our lives as a pie. And whether it's love, money, sex, purpose, however we split that pie up into the things that we want / need, it seems like, if this person has 35%, then that's 35% that we don't have, we can't get.
Right.
And I don't know where we started that mentality, but I think we need to lose that somehow.
It's definitely an American mentality, for sure. It's not just a human thing. It's definitely a predominantly American mentality. And I talk about in my class all the time that everything in our life is a competition. Everything. And I refuse to make yoga a competition. It's the one thing. You got to have one thing, at least one thing that's not a competition. And definitely don't compete with yourself, because that's where the insecurities come from. And if you're motivated by insecurities, all you're doing is getting better at being insecure. Practicing from that place. So I don't know what the source is. I have an idea. I know I don't own a TV, but when I turn one on, I get some insights into where some of it comes from. And educational programs, in all seriousness, are great. But you know as well as anybody, most people are watching the stuff that dumbs them down and numbs them down. And again, if you got to take some personal responsibility and some self-reliance and earn a little efficacy if you want to change your life and the world around you. And that's really what yoga is about.
Well, I am looking forward to at least seeing what this is all about, and I'm definitely gonna come to Omaha Power Yoga. So thank you, Jeff, so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I look forward to it.
From eternity, I prefer to be stretched out at
Hesselgesser on Purpose was brought to you by the Farmhouse Cafe, farm fresh foods you love to eat. If God Could Bake, where they deliver home-baked happiness right to your door. Alston Computer Services, professional computer service at an affordable price.